Hi, second period. I've got my son Jack here with me, and he wants to tell you hi.
Hi.
Okay, so chapter 40 is called The Last Story, and we are at the first chapter of part 3 of the book.
I'm out.
So Kip and Molly and Hester just escaped the night gardener, and it looked like Dr. Crouch had got killed by the stable door that the night gardener flung at him. So chapter 40 is the last story. They rode for what felt like hours. The sky above was limpid and black. It shone with pinprick stars that did little to light their path. Molly sat beside Hester, holding her hand. The old woman's fingers were stiff and sticky with blood. She hardly moved, only sitting up occasionally to release a rattling cough. "You're all right," Molly whispered, stroking her hair. "You'll be all right." Hester swallowed. "I know enough to know that's not true." She smiled and then coughed again. Molly wiped fresh blood from the edges of her mouth. She tried not to let the old woman see the worry on her face. A bloody cough meant she was bleeding on the inside. The wagon rounded a narrow bend, turning away from the river and toward the village. "Stop the cart," Hester murmured, raising her hand. "We're taking you to the village," Molly said. "We'll find you a warm bed and a hot meal and—" Hester coughed. "You'll be hauling a corpse by the time you get there," she said. "This'll do." Molly rapped against the side of the wagon. "Pull over," she called. Kip nodded and steered to the side of the path. Molly watched as he grabbed his crutch and slid down from the bench, his face a picture of stony resolve. In the faint moonlight, he almost looked like Dad. Molly wondered when he had become so grown up. She gently lowered herself off the wagon. Her whole body was sore and bruised. It hurt to stand. She looked at the woods around her. They were in a small clearing where the path broke into 3 parts. "The crossroads," she said. "It's here we first met you." Hester propped herself up on one elbow, peering around. "So it is, even now, even in pain." She had a coy glint in her eye. Molly and Kip helped the old woman off the back of the wagon. She was still wearing her pack of junk. It dangled from her shoulders, a mess of splinters and shards. In the moonlight, it was hard to tell where the pack ended and Hester's body began. "I'll find some firewood," Kip said. "There'll be plenty of time for that after, dearie." Hester grimaced, doubling over in pain. "Help me get this thing off," she said. Molly and Kip gingerly removed the pack from her shoulders and set it on the ground. Without it, the woman looked absurdly small. Hester stared at the pile of wreckage and gave a wry chuckle. "No need to search for firewood. You got all you need right here." She pulled her briar pipe from her pack. The stem dangled from the bowl, snapped off but for a few fibers. "So much for old friends." She tossed the pipe back into the pile. Hester nodded at a rotting stump and limped toward it. Molly rushed to her side and helped her sit. "Thank you, love," she groaned, gripping Molly's hand tight. Molly knew she should have been angry at Hester, should have yelled at her for ruining their trap, but right now she only wanted the old woman to live. She brushed a strand of silver hair from her wrinkled brow. "Where does it hurt? Where don't it hurt? That's the finer question." Hester chuckled, and her chuckle turned to pain. She hunched over, her eyes clenched tight. Molly watched her coughing and felt a swell of nausea. "This is all my fault," she said. "If that net hadn't been there—" "Hush, you," the old woman waved her off. "It wasn't any net or fall or even phantom night gardener. It was curiosity that killed Hester Kettle, plain as that." She stared into the trees, shaking her head. "Oh, I knew it was dangerous. Why do you think I stayed away all these years? But in the end, I just had to go. Had to see it with my own eyes. And I'll tell you right now, it was worth it." She gave a sort of vague smile, her eyes fixed on some invisible plane. What's a storyteller but someone who asks folks to believe in impossible things? And for one perfect moment, I saw something impossible. And that's enough for me. Kip had tied Galileo's reins to a branch and joined his sister and the old woman. "But you didn't just go there to see the tree," he said, his voice tight. "You wanted a piece of your own. You wanted a wish, same as everyone." Molly looked at him, dread rising. "How do you know about wishes?" Kip ignored her and turned back to Hester. "So let's hear it. What was your big wish?" Kip, not now, Molly said. He's fine. The old woman bobbed her head. It's foolish, really. Do you remember all those pretty things I said about Aesop? You called him the king of storytellers, Molly said. Hester knotted her fingers together. I suppose I wanted to be the queen. She peered up at the dark sky, her eyes bright. I wanted the world to remember me for the stories I told. Molly heard this and felt a pain within, for she knew what it was to see a story vanish even as she told it. She could just write 'em down, she said. Make a book. A book, Hester laughed. Can you imagine me, hunched over a little desk, quill in hand, putting down all those fancy scratches on paper? She shook her head. Truth is, I never learned my letters. I can write, Molly said. I can teach you. We can start right now. The old woman shook her head. Afraid there's no time for that, or much else, for that matter, she groaned, pulling herself to her feet. Though there is time for one last thing. She limped to her pack. Most folks don't value a good story, and they pay accordingly. But every once in a while, something a little more special comes my way. She plunged her arm right into the heart of the pack, feeling her way past pots and bird cages and lightning rods. Here it is, she said, standing up. Been carrying this for goodness knows how long. Don't think I'll get around to it now. She handed Molly a small oilskin bundle wrapped tight with twine. Molly turned the package over in her hands. What is it? Something special. I never had much use for it, not being the settling down type. But you two? I've a feeling it might be just what you're after. Molly started to unwrap the bundle, but the woman stopped her. There'll be time aplenty to open that later, she coughed into her fist, once I depart. Molly looked up from her gift. She knew what the woman meant by depart. You're not going to die, Hester. Her voice was shaking. You're going to live and tell stories. You're going to be a queen of stories, remember? She did not know why, but she could not bear the thought of a world without a Hester Kettle in it. The old woman patted Molly's hand. There's a heavy crown for this old brow. She turned back to her pack. Well, looky here. She lifted her hurdy-gurdy from the wreckage. 2 strings were broken, and it had a giant hole in the body. She plucked one of the remaining strings, which obligated with a faint tone. Let it never be said that Hester Kettle wasn't a lucky woman. She slung the instrument over her shoulder. Much as it pains me, I'd best be moving on. Kip hopped to Molly's side. Where are you going? Hester took a deep breath, facing the black woods. It's time for old Hester to tell one more story. It's one I've been working on for a long time, maybe my whole life. Call it The Last Story. The phrase cut a chill through Molly. What's it about? Apologies, love. She sounded genuinely sorry. This one is for me and me alone. That's the way it goes with last stories. Molly wanted to tell her that she could stay, but she knew the truth. There were some places she could only go alone. She blinked, her eyes burning with tears. I bet it'll be a real grand one. Molly looked at her. In the blurred moonlight, she could almost see Hester as a young girl with yellow hair and plump cheeks and scraped knees. Molly would have liked being friends with such a person. I've a feeling some day, she said, when I tell my own last story, I might have an old woman with a pack on her shoulder in it. Hester raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't that be a thing? She bowed her gray head in a half curtsy. You pups take care. She swung her instrument from her shoulder and turned the crank. A slow melody filled the air, echoing through the darkness. With that, the mannequin woman turned and hobbled slowly into the trees, humming to herself secret things that no soul could ever hear. Molly held Kip's hand in her own. They stood together in silence, listening as Hester Kettle's song receded farther and farther into the night. And then it was gone, and the woods were silent. So it's kind of implied that Hester went off to die alone. Chapter 41, I'll read for a little bit longer, is called Alone in the Dark. Molly and Kip picked up Hester's discarded pack, salvaging what food they could. They found dried beef and nuts and berries and even more cheese, enough to last them several days on the road. The rest they burned. Molly stared into the flames, watching the last of Hester Kettle's life smolder into nothing. Hester Kettle, who only a few hours before had been alive. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine the woman's weathered features. Already her face was slipping from Molly's memory, a shifting landscape of eyes and nose and mouth and hair that refused to fix itself into a living thing. "I never seen a person die before," she said. "Tonight I saw two. Good riddance to the doctor, I say." Kip stabbed the end of his crutch in the fire. "He left us to die out there." Molly wanted to chastise him, to tell him it was wrong to say something like that, but she stopped herself. What right did she have to tell him anything? "I saw it happen," she said. "Saw the door come down on him like a house. He couldn't even scream. 1 minute he's running, the next he's not." "Just be thankful it wasn't us," Kip said, though he didn't sound thankful. "So what's next? Back to the orphanage?" "Never. We'll go to another town and find work. Someplace safe. Maybe a nice cemetery or a coven." She tried to smile, but her heart wasn't in it. "Maybe you could tell stories like Hester," Kip said. "Ah, maybe," she said. There was a time when Molly would have enjoyed the idea of roaming the world, telling tales to strangers. But that was before tonight. Before she knew what the world was really like. What could a story possibly do in the face of a thing like the night gardener? Hester had told stories her whole life, and what did it get her? She looked at the oilskin packet that the woman had left them. She couldn't bring herself to unwrap it. Kip prodded the flames. Fire may burn bright, but it makes the world darker. Can hardly see a thing out there. He shivered, eyeing the shadows. "I keep thinking I can hear him out in the trees." "The night gardener?" Molly shook her head. "I've been going over what happened on the bridge. He was in the cart right behind us, and then you hit the road. He fell back, like something stopped him. And remember when he was after you in the woods? Maybe he didn't hurt you because he couldn't reach. So instead he gave you the key to lure you back in." Kip shifted his weight. "So you think he is tied to the tree like a leash? I think it's deeper than that. I think they're connected. You saw what happened when the branch broke. He howled like his own leg had snapped clean off. He's a slave to that tree, and the only way for him to go on living is to keep it alive." "I hardly call that living." Kip pulled his coat tight. "But that's how the tree works, ain't it? It gives you what you wish for, but not in a way that makes things better. I suppose that's the difference between what you want and what you need." Molly nodded. Maybe that's what Hester really meant when she said it takes your soul. She thought about Master Windsor's money. She thought about Constance's ring and Penny's stories and Alistair's candy. She thought about the letters from her parents. She'd been given what she wanted. But what did she need? Kip, as if reading her thoughts, spoke. "What should we do about Ma and Dad? If they're coming to the house, shouldn't we warn them?" Molly opened her mouth to agree, but the words caught in her throat. He looked at her. "Molls, you all right?" Molly stared into the darkness. She swallowed. "Kip, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I need to tell you." She finally met his eye. "It's about the letters." Her brother resumed poking the fire. "It's all right," he said. "I think I know where you're getting 'em." He leaned to one side and dug a hand into his pocket. He removed a small tin. It was roughly the size of a biscuit. "Same place I get these." Molly didn't understand. She scooted closer and took the tin. It was cold to the touch and smelled like tree sap. A paper label ran across the front. "Dr. Rootley's Wonder Balm. It'll cure what ails you." Below the words was a picture of children dancing and running and singing. She looked at a drawing of one little boy leaping into the air, his crutches thrown above him. "Everything I wish for," Kip said, taking the tin back. Molly felt dread grip her stomach. "How long have you known?" "Since the night in the village. I wanted to tell you before, but I was afraid." Molly looked at his leg, which looked as it always did, thin and turned the wrong way. His crutch rested on the log beside him. "You didn't open it?" she said. "No, I wanted to. So bad," he swallowed, touching the label. "But then I thought, even if it works, what happens when I run out? I'd go back for more, and more after that, and it would never be enough." "Ah," Molly said, and she knew he was right. She remembered even now the longing to read another letter and another after that. "Tell me something." He was looking at her now. "Why was the tree giving you letters from Ma and Dad?" Okay, I'm going to stop there.